So I'm joined today by Belinda Brown, who's a patron of the Scottish Family Party. So it's great to have you with us, Belinda, and share some of your thinking and your research on some important areas. And we're going to be talking around the area of gender stereotyping. Now, I've heard you speak about this, so lots of interesting things to say. I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of them in this chat. One of them was the idea of when children are developing, when they're very young, about their understanding about the essence of sex, about the essence of objects in general. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, so children, they learn about the existence of, boys and girls, male and female, in much the same way as they learn about existence of all objects or all things. So first of all, they have, at about the age of 3, they start noticing that there are boys and girls, but even at the age of 3, it's only, it's about, I think by the age of 3, the majority can correctly identify their sex, but it's still not very clear. And even at the age of 4, they can identify their sex, but they can't necessarily identify the sex of when they're presented with dolls of each sex. So there has to be a movement from identifying boy and girl, and they are a boy or girl, to identifying what's called sex constancy, that there is actually some inner essence to being a boy or a girl. And they do this in the same way that they identify any object. They keep finding similarities, and these crystallize around a certain thing. Like a chair might be many different shapes, but it's still got 4 legs, and that's how they learn it's a chair. And it's the same thing with learning that there are boys and girls and males and females. So at these young ages, sort of stereotypes or patterns of appearance, behavior, similarities within each sex help them to identify this sex constancy.
So for very young kids, if they were to see, say, a picture of a man, and then someone like put a cutout of a dress over that man, would they say, oh, that's a woman now?
Yes, I think they would. I think they would. Yes, that's what the video I showed in, they would. It's just done by kind of appearances. And this is interesting because it actually means that before they have the sense of sex constancy, they latch onto stereotypes much more. So in the example given in the book I was reading, the child says to his dad, at a very young age, why are you carrying a purse? Only women carry purses. But that's because he's still at a stage of working out male and female through the stereotypes. So if we want to overcome stereotypes, we need to, in a sense, encourage and enable children to develop this sense of sex constancy. But what we're actually doing through our education system is throwing that in the air. We're actually making it much more difficult for children to develop a sense of being male and female, and that others are male and female, and that this is a constant thing. So, yeah.
So very young children, it's as though they're born with the sort of transgender ideology just there naturally, but which it's not because that's like a good thing that's natural. It's just because they haven't developed a level of understanding. So that same level would apply to other things as well. So if they saw, say, a rat and someone like sellotaped a bushy tail on it, they'd say it was a squirrel.
Exactly.
So it's something that they need to develop out of, but the education system is inhibiting this development.
Yes. I think that's exactly right. It's something that they're developing. And what's also really quite interesting is that genitals are not part of this. So what the research shows, that even if a child grows up in in the kind of household where they're really open about sex differences and their mum and dad walk around naked, the child has been told about penises, and genitals are not actually part of what make them male or female. And I think this is really fascinating, because what it means is that being male and female means so much more than genitals, and it's somehow at a very deep level not dependent on genitals. But what we're doing, if you look at, say, some of the materials in the Scottish Family Party or All About Me, we are kind of creating this obsession with genitals at a really early age, you know, and trying to sort of make this link between sex and genitals when male and female actually for children isn't about genitals. And I can't help wondering if before we had this genital obsession, a child who did identify more with, say, being a boy than a girl would not have felt the same drive to alter their physical body, because being the opposite sex didn't depend so much on the physical body. It's more a sort of general essence, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the line in education, I mean, it seems to be that the message delivered right from nursery upwards, they're really keen to show that there's actually no difference between men and women apart from these physical differences. So they're quite keen to get the little diagrams up of you know, the naked girl, the naked boy, putting up those bits. But beyond that, it's a one-way street. It's all towards they're the same. Men and women can all do the same jobs. Now you can see what they're getting at, and obviously you don't want them feeling that there are some career avenues closed to them. But I think the overall picture given is that there isn't any difference apart from those body parts were labeled on the diagram last week. Apart from that, everything is the same. Then, you know, stopping using boy and girl terms, instead of just trying to erase sex differences beyond, like you were saying, just the blunt physical differences, as though that's all there is really.
I think that all that children will learn from that is that there is some kind of cognitive dissonance between what the powers that be are saying and what their knowledge of reality is telling them, because what children actually pick up on, apparently another source of they associate males with being physically stronger and less vulnerable is because of the contact with the mother and father. So a father is physically stronger. The rough and tumble play, what happens in rough and tumble play is that the child has a sense of this male being as being stronger and different, you know. So for children, I mean, it's obviously, it is a lie. And I mean, the psychological effect, you know, when I see all these things that relationships and sex education are doing, it looks to me like this incredibly crude sort of psychological sledgehammer that's just damaging our children. I mean, we are different. Why feminists, because it came from feminism, has such a problem with being a different, you know, that we are different is bewildering. We've never felt, not never, but, you know, I'm sure in historical, but, you know, I certainly, you know, I'm in my 50s, I never felt remotely constrained. I remember when I realized, as I mentioned, you know, boys are playing football, I went and played football. We're not constrained by these differences. These differences are a valuable resource. You know, it's good to emphasize differences because it expands our universe of things that we can do. Oh, I like what that male's doing, I'll strive for it. And what we do by creating sameness is just limiting the range of options available for everybody. Yeah. And so it's just, you know, males and females are different. It's high time that we started valuing and appreciating our differences. I just, you know, what can I say?
In terms of a child's identity as they're growing up, you get the impression from the way things are dealt with at school that the idea is you develop your identity and that's independent of whether you're a boy or a girl. That doesn't matter. The ideal is that, you know, you're special, you're unique. And that's the way you ought to think of yourself. How does that fit with the evidence? And how important is sex to someone's developing sense of identity?
I think it's really important. I mean, what they show is that the first sense of difference is size. And this is a changing identity, but it's still a sense of identity. And the second absolutely major sense of difference is sex. And I think that actually having this, what sex does, what these identity groups do, is give you a cornerstone on which you can then develop that identity. So if you take away these cornerstones, these children are going to have huge difficulties in developing a sense of identity, because it has to be done in relation to things. I mean, for example, even if you are a girl who is quite tomboyish and you know you don't like all those girly things, that is still a strong sense of identity. But if you say there are no girly things and there are no boyish things, then you've got no yardstick to develop any sense of identity. So what we're actually doing is preventing children from developing a sense of identity. And I think that sometimes, you know, the result of that can be some of the destructive behaviors that we see, you know, in forms of physical initiation with transgenderism and that sort of thing. I mean, that's elaborating. I'm jumping a few steps ahead. Yeah. But we're basically spoiling identity development. We're hamstringing identity development. We're preventing it.
Yeah. I mean, the theory of the sort of gender fluidity ideology is if you take away these stereotypes, then people will be able to develop their own identities without this pressure, and then they won't have these conflicts coming up. But it's so obvious that exactly the opposite is happening. That the more they try and move people away from a clear identity as male or female, the more problems it creates. So the evidence is so clear, but
I know
like no one's interested in this.
It is. I mean, all I can think about is it just shows how much power a small group of people have to influence so many people. I mean, I heard somebody told me this. I don't know if it's true because my history is not very good. And I mean, of course, people would scream about making a parallel, but I'm only making a parallel in terms of numbers. What I was told, and I don't know if it's true, is that the Nazis, I'm not saying that the LGBT lobby are like Nazis, but that the Nazis started out with say about 6% of the population supported them, but they infiltrated all the different institutions. And I mean, if you read Kirk and Madsen's book, I mean, there is a specific strategy to infiltrate institutions with an ideology. It's what the feminists did. And I think that's because it's just stupid, really. It's this stupid ideology that most people don't believe in. But then there is this whole association, particularly with LGBT. People are so afraid of being homophobic. And you see, for me, I know I'm not homophobic. I've been very involved with gay people all my life, really. And I know I'm not homophobic. So you can't intimidate me to say what I think. And I know I'm not sexist, you know. So I think people get all intimidated by worried about, you know, why they collude with this crazy minority who impose this ideology. I can only think it's because they're afraid of themselves, you know, in the same way that the most feminist men are always actually deep down always avoid a feminist man because you will find out he's sexist. So maybe the people who support the LGBT political ideology do suffer from a bit of homophobia, and that's why they can identify with the ideology. I can't identify with it.
The secret of these movements is that they create a society where it's in people's self-interest to go with the flow.
Yes.
So virtually whatever career you're in, you're going to get promoted more, you're going to make more money, you're going to have a quieter life, you're going to be more popular, you're going to get more awards, etc. If you go with the flow.
Exactly.
And for a big chunk of people in the middle, that's what they'll do.
Exactly.
They'll go along with that.
Absolutely. And, you know, I suppose I have to be very grateful. In a way, I'm grateful to my husband. I was a carer for so many years. I came out of the system and, you know, and I was, you know, I didn't need to participate in the system. So I could go my own way. I mean, I hope I would never have compromised myself, but you can never tell. Maybe I'd have compromised myself in the same way that everyone else does. Quite possible. I hope not. But
just go back to identity of children. I was interested in what you had to say about boys and girls' toys. We touched on it earlier on. And you were saying that you think there's a stronger female identity available off the shelf, if you like, whereas male identity is denigrated and it's a bit vaguer. Whereas there's a very clear sort of pink, girly, glittery identity there. And you feel maybe some boys are attracted to that because they're looking for an identity. And that's the obvious one on the peg to take on. Is that a fair summary of what you think happens?
That is a fair summary of what I think happened. I've been trying to work out why, after, you know, so many years of feminism, the sex differences between toys seems so much greater. It was always there. And the different ideas which I came up with, and I'm going to tell you another one that I've just read, but the different ideas I came up with is that, well, the male toys have been, or girl toys sort of just provide a more clear, well, let me just tell you what I just read about, because I think this is the best explanation. It's quite interesting, was that because of this size and age thing, you know, girls develop this idea between the ages of 5 and 8 that little boys are somehow more prestigious. I mean, it erodes. There are other elements to this, but they develop this idea of little boys being more prestigious. Little boys, where little boys played with little boy toys, little girls are actually were more likely to play with boy toys, because boys were associated with something sort of a bit better. But that's been completely eroded. You know, I'm sure boys are told in 101 different ways that they are slightly more inferior, and girls know this. So girls no longer play with boy toys. They just go more for the clearly identified sort of girl toys. But also just because, I mean, and how identity gets eroded, because boys don't have a clear sense of identity. We might get more of these cases where there was that little boy in America where boys really latch on to female identity because it's so much clearer. And I think I can give an example. It's from real life, but if you think about a couple where the mother is glamorous and the main earner, and the father is the stay-at-home parent, the little boy, I think, will be more likely to go to identify with a higher added value, which would be the mother. So, yeah, it's complicated. Does that answer?
Yeah. But again, in terms of identity, they're flattening the idea of sex. So they're taking away young people's ability to develop a proper sense of identity, including their sex. So it's producing the confusion. But another answer that's offered to that, obviously, is the LGBT identity. As soon as you opt for one of those, you've got a very, very clear identity. You've got a tribe. It's celebrated. You've got a badge to wear.
Exactly.
It's simple to tell people. So you can see the attraction.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, throwing people in the sea, then offering a rope.
Exactly. I think that is exactly what happens. Identity, you know, the rug is pulled out from under these little children's feet just as they're trying to develop sex constancy. They're bombarded with all these crazy ideologies telling them there's no difference between the sexes. They become all confused. And then if they say that they're any form of LGBT, and if you look through these resources, right, normal heterosexual identity, what they call cisgender, will be about one of, let's say, 10 options. And as soon as they identify with any of those other ones, they can become part of a member of a group, they can become part of a member of the society at school, they can phone up helplines, they will see reflections of themselves in the media. Tremendous positive reinforcement. So, you know, it's the sort of psychological manipulation going on of our children is appalling. Yeah.
Right, moving on. I've got some other thoughts about stereotypes. So I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say about this.
Okay.
To what degree are sex stereotypes actually a positive thing? Well, we've talked about in terms of them playing a part in identity. So do these sort of behaviors, modes of dress, etc., interests, do they play a positive part in forming someone's identity? So if for example, you've got a girl whose interests are very much boy typical, her clothing, her manner, is that a problem? Or should she be sort of gently steered in a different direction in some ways? Or is it just fine and you let her be? What do you think?
I think you definitely just let her be. And I think that having this boy identity is not at all incompatible with having male and female stereotypes. You know, I remember when I was at school, there was a real tomboy. There was a real tomboy girl, and she was like, we thought she was a bit of a heroine, you know, because we just thought she was, I don't know, she was just different and cool. I would like try to copy her, to be honest, which is a bit pathetic, you know, try and play football and stuff. But I think that the main thing is being able to have an identity, and whether your identity goes along with the flow of, for example, if you're a little girl, and I probably on the whole was a little girly girl, if you're a little girl and you are fairly similar to the sort of more feminine things, that's fine. And if you're a little girl and you find yourself fighting against that, you will at least still have a strong sense of identity. It will be an identity of challenge. And that's why you might find, I think quite often you might find people who are non-conformist may have started out sexually non-conformist, and then this might have evolved into some more creative thing because they kind of formed this identity that was in contradiction to the mainstream. So, I mean, I think sexed identities are, I think, as I said before, I think they're a resource. And I think that they do also tap into realities. You know, there are, and you only need to do a bit of research, there are real differences between male and female. And I think that stereotypes actually provide us with a way of building our identity, whether it's in conforming to or sort of fighting against.
Yeah, I think maybe a slightly different take on it. I think in terms of establishing identity, I think a degree of stereotypical behavior, interests, style, whatever, can be helpful. I think also, I'm sure you'll agree, the complementarity between the sexes is an important thing. So in the longer term, if people are looking towards heterosexual relationships, being a mum and whatever, mum and dad, or whatever, then having those complementary qualities, I think, is an important part of that relationship, and it's going to make that bonding and cooperation more successful in the longer term. I think the heterosexuality in general, it is founded to a degree on opposites attracting.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're sort of merging together, then, I mean, normally same-sex friendships are based on common interests. Whereas sexual attraction is based on opposites attracting. So if you've got, for example, a girl who's got a lot of traditionally masculine qualities, interests, whatever, then there's going to be the tendency that they're going to go more in that direction, which I would say long term is probably less likely to be a good road to go down in terms of relationships. Now, that's not to say you're going to enforce these things or tell people what they can and can't do, but just in terms of what you're going to encourage, and if you're going to give a nudge here and there or a bit of encouragement in a certain direction,
I think
maybe towards the tradition might be helpful for them in the longer term. I don't know.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that these are these are important cultural nudges which help us to build heterosexual relationships, because you've kind of expressed, I agree with what you say, and it is actually quite good to sort of adapt, just nudges. And I'll tell you something which I think is quite interesting, because I do think that's what that's what's really, sexuality, what makes sexuality really interesting is that it is about opposites sort of attracting and getting together. And I can't help noticing that. So, for example, I sometimes get in homosexual relationships, both lesbian and gay, there is also a tendency to try to recreate difference. It's as if difference is necessary for sexuality, whereas males and females naturally have that difference. I mean, you know, I hate to say it, but, you know, for example, what was it called, NAMBLA or PI? These were both paedophilia type organizations, which were set up by sort of male homosexuality. So there you create age differences, because the difference is what creates the attraction. If you think of the little children's story, Prince Henry, that's about a class difference where the prince falls in love with his servant. So I think there's something about difference which is important for sort of sexuality, sexual relationships.
Let's say in terms of someone's identity, if say we've got the girl with very sort of typically masculine interests or whatever, and then maybe we could still say to people like that, you shouldn't repudiate your sex identity. So when it comes to things where you can just choose, like what you wear, I would say it'd be good advice to people to say, you know, don't like repudiate your sexual identity through what you wear. Don't wear things that are distinctly associated with the opposite sex. So when people see them, they'll think, oh, that's someone trying to reject their sexual identity. I think that's unhealthy. So I think some of those cultural markers can actually be helpful, because people can opt into those just by a matter of choice. I mean, you can't choose to like ballet instead of football or whatever. You can't change those things. But the cultural markers, I think, can have an important place, because you can't just opt into them as an act of will. And that can help to reinforce and cement someone's sexual identity, even though in terms of other interests, behaviors, whatever, they might not be typical.
You know, I think that's interesting, and I think that by the same token, if you are, you know, if you are one of these men, I think it's more, I can more think of women, you know, if you are one of these women who just really wants to be more male, by maintaining those cultural markers which you're talking about, you still maintain a resource for that female who is absolutely adamant that she wants to be more male. And in some sense, you take away the need for her to physically mutilate her body, because she can actually adopt so much clearer cultural markers, because the rest of us have been busy maintaining them. So, so yeah, I think on the whole that these cultural markers are a good thing, and you know, and I think if you know, if a woman does want to, I mean, there have been people in history. I think there was someone, even a woman who was in an army. I mean, throughout history, I can find it on my laptop because I collect them. You know, people didn't know she was a woman until after she died. So I think, yeah, let's kind of encourage cultural markers. But I mean, I'm not going to, you know, if a woman wants to be a man, pretend to be a man or whatever, and wants to adopt them all, you know, she's a lesbian and that's just how she feels comfortable, I wouldn't get in the way of that, you know. And I think the conservatives of us are kind of helpful, because we help maintain an identity that they can express their opposite sex, their belief in an opposite sex feeling.
If someone was asking me for my advice, I'm not going to try and stop anyone doing anything, but someone was asking me for advice, I would urge them to adopt these cultural markers that align with their sex, and I think that would be a healthy thing. So it's interesting as well.
I would agree. Like school uniform, I'm not in favour of completely just throwing school uniform open. I would encourage girls to wear skirts and actually.
You see in some schools around, primary schools in Edinburgh, you'll see above two of the doors, carved in stone, there's a boys' entrance and a girls' entrance.
Yeah, we've got that here too, yeah.
And I think for decades, people would have gone past that, as I would have done, looked at that and thought, that's quite quaint, but how ridiculous. Because now I look at it and think, actually, were they onto something there? So that means no matter how you feel, no matter what your interests are, no matter any of that, every morning when you arrive at school, you're reminded that you're a boy or a girl. And that's just really clear to everyone. It's really clear to you. And I think that might be a helpful message.
Definitely.
A lot of cultural things, a lot of traditions, they the problem is we lose sight of the rationale for them. Then they look ridiculous. But then when you realize when things are starting to go wrong as a result, you can say, oh, well, actually, maybe they were onto something. And I think now maybe they were.
Yes, I feel like that now that we see everything crumbling about us. And I think that one of the things is, this just kind of getting rid of all distinctions. And yet these I see them as valuable resources. And so maybe they were onto something, I'm a girl or I'm a boy. I think these, identity, I mean, they have actually found that identity is encourages pro-social behavior. So if there's a group that you identify with, this facilitates sociability. So, and apart from age, but the first main one is sex. It's your first unchanging identity. I just think, I just think you're right.
It's quite interesting. I mean, people will say if we went back or went forward to the sort of education that we would envisage, let's say there was a boys' entrance and a girls' entrance, whatever, and there are different uniforms, that people could say that you're going to get the child who really does have a gender identity disorder, and their life's going to be a misery because they have to line up in that line every day, and they feel it doesn't fit, and they're really unhappy, etc. Which I can see something in that. I wouldn't dismiss that completely at all. But what we're doing is going from that system where you had the very occasional child who had that psychological disorder. It was very rare, and they might have had quite a tough time. I'm sure people would try and help them as well. Whereas now we've gone down the other route where instead of it just being a really unusual thing, it's just making it really widespread. So in attempting to be compassionate to a tiny, tiny, tiny minority, instead, we're producing a far larger number of people with the same problem in the name of compassion, which overall is reducing the sum total of well-being among young people.
Yes, unfortunately, I completely agree with you. It'd be better if I disagreed, but I do completely agree with you, and I think also that there's a misunderstanding about dealing with pain and discomfort. There is a belief that somehow it can just be magicked away. And this is underpinned by, this is a sort of utopianism, and we will never have utopia on earth, and pain and discomfort is there. And I think that those children who deal with it young, they might be stronger when they are older. But also you see it, for example, it happens with this whole idea of different families. There's the belief that we have to introduce the idea that all families are absolutely equal and all equally as good as each other, because the child who has the non-conventional family will otherwise suffer. And as a person who's had non-conventional families and continues to have a non-conventional family, I don't think that is how it works. I think that actually, if you exist in a unconventional situation, say you're missing the father in the family, there will be certain difficulties, and you can say, well, these difficulties arise because I am in that difficult situation, sort of thing. This probably isn't following. I've jumped off on a tangent, but it's what sparked off just this whole idea that you can somehow get rid of suffering. And actually, I think it's better to sort of have an ideal or have a norm. This is the ideal, and then you can sort of position yourself in relation to that norm, and that's not a source of pain. That is a source of explanation. And so I don't know why there's this feeling that we all have to feel that we're exactly the same in order to be happy. I don't know if you see what I mean. If you read all the family stuff, it's all about all different kinds of families being absolutely equal, and they're not. And there's no harm and there's no shame in that. It's just that some forms work better than others.
Yeah. Remember, there are that right from nursery in Scotland. Some families have 2 mums and 2 dads. Is one of the slides showing 2 men and 2 women, a sort of co-parenting arrangement. Just going back a bit. I think, let's see if you agree with this. I think some of what gets labelled as transphobia is actually an intuition that's built into us. So, for example, when I say people of any age, when they see, for example, a boy wearing a dress, there's something in you that just says, no, that's not right. That shouldn't be happening. And it's treated as if it's some sort of ignorant prejudice. But I think you have a decent case that this is actually something that's built in. It's a positive intuition to try and help direct people. And again, it comes back to what I was saying. Whereas you might have the person with a real serious gender identity disorder, and that maybe they're going to get upset by that. The people are not willing to accept what they're doing. But on the other hand, there could be a large number of young people who are directed by that little bit of peer pressure or whatever just helps to steer them on a better life course. So I think there's probably a lot of other boys in particular in schools around Britain who are getting punished for transphobia when actually they're expressing what's actually a positive intuition, something that's there for a good reason.
Absolutely. And I think that it's particularly the case. I'm an anthropologist at heart, that's my area of study. And the male identity is actually, I would say, more culturally created than the female identity, in the sense that our identity emerges out from our bodies, from our capacity to give birth. You could take a female and plant her anywhere in the world, and her role will actually be fairly similar in some ways. But if you take a male, the whole male identity, as an anthropologist, it's really culturally constructed. And part of what those so-called transphobia is doing is facilitating the construction of that male identity. That's all it's helping to do, is help create an identity for the boy, to latch onto. So again, I think you're right. I think it is a helpful thing to do, and I mean, it just reminds me of one thing which, and you must feel this as well, being an older person. We remember that when we were younger, I mean, I can't think of a single girl in my all-girls school who would have been happier, dressed up as a boy, or having surgery, or thinking that she was a boy. And yet young people today seem to think that this trans identity has just been suppressed, and suddenly we're just allowing it, and now they're all coming. That's not the case. This trans identity is being created precisely by this whole process of smashing sexed identities. Yeah. We're creating
the big picture of virtually every sort of conservative stance on a social issue. The mountain of evidence is in favor of it, but it's just swept aside. I was looking at a thing the other day. There was a drag queen story time with Edinburgh Libraries. It was on Facebook, and I looked at the website of UK Drag Queen Story Time, and it said, "Why do we do this?" Why, it said, it's really important to present the children with, gender, the ideology of gender fluidity, etc. One of the reasons they gave was because people who are transgender have such appalling mental health.
Yeah. It's just such, it's crazy, isn't it?
Well, because it causes cancer, of course.
Yeah, it's just crazy, isn't it? These people have appalling mental health, so we want to create lots more of these people.
I want to share the misery.
To share the misery. It's just crazy. And this is one of the things, no matter, for as long as people in their LGBT identity experience some kind of unhappiness, that will always be attributed to the rest of the world, until all the way, until everyone's so miserable that, because we've all adopted this So yeah, it's just it's I mean, there is a really good quote. If you don't mind, I'm just going to look it up. It's actually from the Kirk and Madsen book. If I can just, we are safest in the long run if we can actually make them like us. Conversion aims at just this. We mean conversion of the average American's emotions, mind, and will through a planned psychological attack in the form of propaganda fed to the nation via the media. So that was Kirk and Madsen. Was it after the ball? So you know, this is a specific strategy that was developed in the late 80s, and it has been being rolled out since then.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But here's another.
Tragically, I'm talking about it very lightly, I should say. Like, oh, and actually, you know, I think it's incredibly damaging. I think it's tragic, and I'm prepared to dedicate a great deal of time to trying to fight this. So I'm kind of making light of it, but I don't think we should underestimate the seriousness of this.
No, and the description of it as state child abuse, I think, is justified.
Yes,
my reason for that is, if you had a teacher saying to the class, you know, some of you might be smokers, some of you might not be smokers. It's just up to you. But if you think you might be a smoker, you know, I'll take you down to the shop and I'll get you some cigarettes and you can give it a try and see if that's for you. But that would be abusive, because you're deliberately introducing children to something that's known to be extremely harmful in the longer term. This is just the same. I mean, appeasing the ideologue is more important than the well-being of the children. Just another little point. This attack on stereotyping, the idea that it's basically for detaching gender from sex, isn't it? So it doesn't matter how you behave, what you wear, or whatever. That should actually be nothing to do with sex. Everyone's got a free choice. Now, some people see that as a way of promoting transgender ideology. The fact that everything's fluid, you can swap and change, that's easy. Whereas I think some other people see it as the antidote to transgenderism, because they think if you can just say, you know, it doesn't matter, men can do anything, women can do anything, you can have any mixture of characteristics, whatever, that's all fine. So there's no need to be transgender, because you can do whatever you like. So some people think they're encouraging transgenderism. Some people think it's the antidote to transgenderism. But I think in actual fact, it does promote transgenderism. Yeah. The facts show it, the massive increase in it. So I think the hopeful idea that you're going to take away people's desire to change sex or change gender doesn't actually come through. And the reason is, like you were saying at the very beginning, is because sex is such a fundamental part of our identity. It can't just be ignored and washed away or buried under these other more superficial things. It's still there as a really important part of our identity. And that's why it results in problems when people go down this route.
Yeah, you're spot on. I found exactly that argument made by Katie Alcock in two articles, one in Transgender Trend and one in Fair Play for Women. And she thinks that you need to get rid of stereotypes, that this will somehow get rid of transgender. But exactly as you say, I think that getting rid of stereotypes, destroying identity is creating transgender. So I wish I could disagree with you, but I mean, I would agree that, you know, and the whole transgender thing has this kind of crazy, ironic dependence on stereotypes at the same time. You know, you can't be a trans man, or you can't be a trans woman without without emphasizing a female stereotype. I mean, I don't know, it's like Caitlyn Jenner or whatever. They're all these kind of, they have a particular idea of, they're kind of a caricatured feminine.
It's like drag, isn't it?
It is.
Like drag promotes gender fluidity. The gender doesn't look very fluid to me.
No, it doesn't. No. Yeah. I saw a comment about, it was a photo of some trans woman, and somebody had tweeted Dick Emery, and I thought that was a terrible insult to Dick Emery. But getting at. But yeah. So yes, it's I think, you know, what I think drives it, when I think about the whole transgender thing, I think that because, you know, if you think about mothers who have allowed their children to go through the path of medical transition, I mean, we can't get away from it. The child, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I can't see it in any other way. There has been some surgical excisions, or, you know, the body has been mutilated, you know, or even if it's just hormones, this has damaged the body. And I think that as a mother, if that had happened to my child, I would want to make my child feel better. And I would make my child feel better by trying to create more and more people like this, so that they wouldn't feel acute awareness perhaps of what had happened. You know, they'd be comfortable, they'd have a group of like-minded people. I think that I perceive it as a form of abuse. It is child abuse as far as I'm concerned. And but somehow, if that can kind of be diluted, that sense can be diluted if there are more people like that. So that's...
But the other factor there is, if a young person starts to go down this route, they're very definitely getting the message that anyone who disagrees with you or questions what you're doing or tries to suggest you go down a different route, then that's transphobia. And they're the really bad people. So there must be lots of cases where young people are talking to their parents, and their parents are trying to help them, probably with a lot more wisdom than they're getting from school. And that's triggering it in the young person. Oh, this is what they taught me about at school. Okay, my parents are transphobic.
Shall I tell you something which I've been thinking about, Richard? It's that you know, when I was young, I remember, was this just me? I thought of, you know, you remember Pink Floyd, The Wall, and I used to think about it. We don't need no education. You don't need no thought control. And I used to think, yeah, they're forming the way I think. These education systems are forming the way I think. I mean, maybe that's why I'm so to this day rebellious. I mean, I thought that from a very young age, and I thought everybody thought like that. Now, we've got a system, right? So I can tell you, like, we know, you and I know through our research, that the whole LGBT ideology has massive government funding behind it. The civil service has a disproportionate number of gay people. This is like mainstream status quo. And yet, you know, some of the LGBT, some of them, like I used to have some a long time ago, because they would disown me now, but I used to have, well, one of them till more recently, you know, I used to have very good lesbian friends, and they were like really non-conformist, you know, with tattoos and with this and with that. And can they not see that they're latching onto the ideology which has all the funding and the power? Do you know what I mean? It's like they think of themselves as being non-conformists, and a lot of LGBT, but yet they've got all the state funding. They are on the status quo. Can't they see that they're being taken for a ride? You know, that's sorry, it's just something I think about. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, just one thing to finish. You mentioned when you were at school. When I was at primary school, which isn't that long ago, we used to have a lesson where the girls went off and did needlework and the boys did science. I mean, I find it remarkable that was happening in whatever 1978 or something. 1980. I mean, that's obviously, you know, way off in the other direction. So the way forward is for to a large extent, is for schools just to forget the whole thing. They don't need to be intervening in gender. They don't need to have an anti-stereotyping agenda. Just give them all the same choices, give them all the same opportunities.
Exactly.
I mean, are there really any girls growing up thinking, well, can a girl be a politician? I never realized a girl could be a politician. Can a girl be a doctor? I mean, no one thinks these things anymore. They could just cut it all from the curriculum completely. And I think that would be a lot better for us.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's quite mythical, this idea that we did feel restricted if we wanted to do something. And there always have been women who've done extraordinary things, or, you know, if we really wanted to do something, we always have done something. So I think absolutely, just give us all equal opportunities and let us find our way. And, you know, actually, there's a book, it's called The Chemistry PhD, and it actually shows that girls artificially now restrict their choices because they've been told so much that they'll be discriminated against. So we are enforcing the very sort of stereotypes, again, that we've been trying to get rid of. So I'm all for it. Just give people the tools to find their own way. Get rid of all the ideological baggage that schools are imposing on our children. Teach them subjects to help them go and function in the outside world, not ideology.
Yeah. I mean, in Scotland now, in further education colleges, if you're running a course that's more than 75% male or female, you have to have a strategy for what you're going to do about it. It's just completely bizarre. But that's the case. I was going to say something else.
Honestly, you know, it's a shame about Nicola Sturgeon. You know, it's like what a disaster. You know, I used to have such a high impression of you know, Scottish education system. I have got Scottish roots, and I just thought Scottish education was an example to the rest of the UK, and it's just, I'm afraid it's really gone.
Long gone.
Yeah, there we go.
I think the other thing with this stereotype business, it's all, you know, you can be a female firefighter, you can be a male nurse, and all that sort of thing. I think partly they are genuinely wanting, well, they want 50-50 in every profession, which is not a good goal. The other thing they want, obviously, is they want all the girls growing up to see that the highest calling has been a career. You know, to be a fighter pilot or a CEO or an MSP or whatever. You would never get in that any suggestion that family life was going to figure for boys or girls. That would never come and compete with these other exciting ways of fulfilling your potential, as it's called. But you know all about that, don't you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was reading in this thing about, you know, the cognitive development of children, and even though boys, you know, from I think the age of, you know, 5 to 8 or whatever, they were associated with, by girls and boys, with some kind of higher level of power. Actually, this was compatible with girls really highly evaluating, you know, they didn't see femininity as a bad thing. They really highly valued that as well. So it wasn't that they didn't highly value themselves. It's just there was this kind of power thing. There was a bit of that. But they still really highly valued a whole host of very feminine roles. And now we see this huge, very disproportionate number of young women who are drawn towards being trans men. And I think this is precisely a product of decades of feminism completely smashing the female role and saying that it's of no value and no worth, because it seems that what happens, you know, what we've done is we said to those little girls who in the past were attracted to the female things, we've given them the same sources of prestige that the boys had. And suddenly, instead of thinking, you know, I'm really great and I'm a great woman, it seems like they don't want to be girls anymore. So I think, again, I'm afraid that the destruction of these, you know, of female roles, you know, whether nurturing or whatever that we used to have, that it's just the devaluation of them has been really damaging for women, girls.
The message is always the thing to celebrate is when someone does what you wouldn't normally expect.
Yes.
That's admirable.
Yes.
So if women do something you normally associate with men, let's put their poster on the wall. When men do something you normally associate with women, we'll put their poster on the wall. If you're actually sort of in the majority doing that well, you know,
just
get to the back of the queue. You know, you're never going to get promoted, are they?
But you know, I'll tell you the really sad thing about it is that actually, you know, well, anybody who achieved something great, I would hold in high esteem. But I did really, you know, I have got my, you know, my female people that I really look up to. But now when I see a woman in a really high place, I'm thinking, oh, how did she get there? Was that genuine talent? I can't help. There's this little niggle thing where I know the whole politically correct system. Whereas in the past, you know, I don't know, Florence Nightingale, Sojourner Truth. I don't know. I have women who are my heroines, but they, you know, they got there through genuine talent. And now the women, they don't provide a role model for me because I just think, what a cop out, you know, you've just played. I'm sorry, but I don't, you know, there are some women I do in the contemporary age have female heroines. I really do. I have certain women I'd like to see statues made of them. But they're usually very non-conformist in various ways, very non-conformist, and no one else would want a statue made of them, but I would. So. Yeah.
Well, I think we should wrap it up before we get on to the issue of statues, because that could take it in a whole new direction.
Indeed, yes.
Well, that was extremely interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much for asking me my thoughts. I really enjoyed that. Thanks, Richard. Yes.
Till next time.
Yes, till next time.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, good luck. Bye-bye.